Imagine discovering that your husband secretly took out a $350,000 loan in your name without telling you. What would you do? Today, on True Tales, we're sharing the remarkable story of Sarah Morris, a woman whose journey from betrayal to victory will leave you stunned. This 64-year-old woman's clever retaliation against her gambling unfaithful husband will make you rethink everything. Be sure to subscribe to True Tales and hit the notification bell because this story shows just how dangerous it can be to underestimate a woman. The papers came on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a nervous courier who avoided making eye contact with me. I signed for them with steady hands, though my heart was already pounding. Even before I opened the envelope, I knew my life was about to be torn apart. I'm Sarah Morris, 64 years old. And up until that moment, I thought I understood my life. For 36 years, I had been married to Jonathan Morris, a charismatic man with big ambitions and a reckless streak. We lived in a lovely Victorian house in a quiet part of Connecticut, with a beautiful garden and a view of the nearby lake that always made me feel like I had it all. Jonathan ran Morris Realty, property development firm that had experienced its fair share of ups and downs over the years. As his wife, I had learned to endure the long nights, the tense phone calls, and the unpredictable cycles that came with the business. I had stood by him through every success, every failure, and every comeback. What I didn't know, though, was that he had been using my name, my credit, and my financial reputation to back his increasingly risky ventures. The documents in that envelope were from State Bank, telling me I was responsible for a $350,000 business loan that had defaulted. There, in black and white, was my signature on paperwork I had never seen. I slumped into my chair in the kitchen as the papers spilled across the counter like broken pieces of my trust. The signature was mine, or at least a perfect imitation of it. Jonathan had been practicing my signature for months, if not years. Until it was indistinguishable from the real thing, my hands shook as I reached for my phone to call him. But then something cold and calculated crept into my chest, feeling I had never experienced before. Instead of dialing his number, I carefully put the papers back into the envelope and walked to my office. If Jonathan thought he could ruin me financially and walk away untouched, he was about to find out how wrong he was that evening. Jonathan came home as usual, expensive wine, dinner from our favorite restaurant, and that charming smile that had captivated me when we first met. "How was your day, darling?" he asked, kissing my cheek as if everything was fine. I served dinner on the fine china we'd received at our wedding. It's the irony not lost on me. Here I was, sharing a meal with the man who was systematically dismantling our marriage, using the very symbols of our commitment. "Jonathan," I said, carefully cutting my chicken into small pieces, "I got something interesting today." He froze his fork halfway to his mouth. "What kind of documents?" he asked, his mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew. "From State Bank, a loan. A very large loan." His face turned pale, but he quickly regained his composure. Setting his fork down and reaching for his wine glass, "Sarah, I can't explain," he began, his voice shaky. "Can you?" I asked softly. "Can you explain how my signature ended up on loan papers I never saw? Kay, can you explain how you risked everything, our house, our entire future, without even talking to me about it?" Jonathan stood up suddenly, pacing around the dining room like a trapped animal. "The business was in trouble, Sarah. Serious trouble. If I didn't take that loan, we would have lost everything. It was protecting us by signing the papers without telling you. What else could I have done?" His voice grew louder, and I saw the true Jonathan, the desperate, selfish man hidden beneath the polished surface. "You don't get it, Sarah," he said, his frustration clear. "The competition, the market conditions, the gambling debts, ... His voice trailed off as he stopped pacing. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. Bank statements, credit card bills, and casino transaction records filled the display. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about Atlantic City? About the private poker games? About the $150,000 you've lost in the past 4 months?" Jonathan slumped into his chair. the fight draining from him. For a moment, I almost felt sympathy for him. Almost, "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice quiet. 3 months, I replied. And I found out about the forged signatures and fraudulent loans this morning. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with what seemed like hope. "Sarah, we can fix this. We can work together like we always have. The casino debt. Pay that off with the profits from the lakeside development. We'll renegotiate the loan terms, bring in some partners." "No." The word hung in the air, sharp and final. "No," he repeated, disbelief in his voice. "No, Jonathan." I said, my voice steady. "I can't fix this. You destroyed that possibility the moment you decided my financial security wasn't worth as much as your gambling addiction." I stood up, leaving my half-eaten meal behind. "I'll be in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, I'm calling my lawyer." As I walked toward the stairs, I heard him call after me, his voice pleading. "Sarah, you can't be serious. After all these years, you're going to throw it all away over money." I paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned back to look at him. This man I had loved and trusted for most of my adult life. "I'm not throwing anything away, Jonathan," I said softly. "You already did that for both of us. It's the next." 3 months flew by in a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and the slow but steady destruction of our shared life. Jonathan hired the most expensive divorce lawyer in the area, confident he could outsmart me in court. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment much longer than he realized. My attorney, Grace Williams, was a sharp, seasoned woman in her 50s who specialized in high-net-worth divorces involving financial fraud. She had been highly recommended by my friend Lucy, whose own divorce from her dishonest ex-husband had made headlines in town 5 years ago. The challenge, Grace explained during our first meeting, is that your husband has been systematically moving assets out of reach. Business accounts have been drained, transferred to offshore holdings that we can't access. The properties are hidden behind layers of LLCs. Even your joint investment accounts have been cashed out. I nodded calmly, taking notes in the sleek leather folder I had bought specifically for these meetings. "What about the loan? The $350,000 debt in my name?" I asked. "Legally, you're responsible for it since your signature is on the documents. Proving forgery is possible, but difficult, especially since the signatures are so well done. Even if we can prove fraud, the bank will still expect repayment." Jonathan had been meticulous. In the months before I discovered his deceit, he had been quietly liquidating everything we had built together. Our retirement accounts had been drained. Our stock portfolio was sold off. Even my grandmother's heirloom jewelry had vanished from our safe deposit box. When I confronted him about the missing jewelry during one particularly tense mediation session, simply shrugged. "Desperate times, Sarah," he said. "I had to raise capital somehow. Besides, it's not like you ever wore those old pieces anymore." His casual dismissal of my family's heirlooms items passed down through 3 generations solidified something inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about value, about dignity. The realization that I was a person with rights and dignity, no longer willing to be treated as invisible, finally settled in by the time we reached the final divorce hearing. Jonathan had successfully painted me as a naive housewife who had never worked outside the home, with no understanding of business or finances. His lawyer argued that I should be grateful for any settlement at all, given the company's dire financial state. "Your Honor," the attorney said with exaggerated sincerity, "Mrs. Morris has lived a comfortable life for decades, fully supported by my client's business expertise. While we sympathize with her situation, the reality is that the business assets simply aren't there to provide the kind of settlement she's demanding." I remained calm at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded and my face neutral. Grace had advised me to remain silent and let Jonathan and his lawyer make their case. "Let them hang themselves with their own words," she had said. And that's exactly what they did. The final hearing took place on a dreary November morning. the weather reflecting my mood. I had carefully chosen my outfit, a professional navy blue suit with pearl earrings that had once belonged to my mother. My wedding ring, which I planned to remove for the last time when the judge signed the divorce decree, completed the look. Jonathan arrived with his usual entourage, his lawyer, his business partner, and his new girlfriend, a blonde woman who was barely half his age and worked as a marketing consultant for his company. The girlfriend, Brittany or something like that, I never bothered to remember her name, sat in the gallery wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. I had chosen to attend alone. Aside from Grace, something about facing this final chapter with quiet dignity felt important to me. The hearing itself was mostly procedural discussions about asset division, spousal support, and debt allocation. All the dry legal language that reduced decades of shared memories to a few bullet points on a court form. When Judge Harrison asked about the $350,000 loan, Jonathan's lawyer was ready with his defense. Your Honor, while Mrs. Morris claims the signatures were forged, our handwriting expert has determined that they are genuine. Furthermore, Mrs. Maurice was aware of her husband's business dealings and had signed similar documents in the past. This appears to be an attempt to avoid responsibility for debts incurred during the marriage. I felt Grace tense beside me, but I kept my expression neutral. We had expected this argument. The lawyer continued, additionally, our forensic accountant has determined that the Morris family's total assets, including the family home, business, interests, and liquid investments, amount to approximately $40,000 after outstanding debts are resolved. Given Mrs. Morris's limited earning capacity and the substantial debt burden, my client is generously offering to assume all business debts in exchange for retaining primary ownership of Morris Realty. It was a well-rehearsed performance, designed to make me look like a gold digger trying to escape responsibility for debts I was supposedly responsible for when Judge Harrison asked if I had anything to add. I stood slowly and spoke clearly. Your Honor, I accept the proposed settlement, as outlined by opposing counsel. The silence in the courtroom was palpable. Grace shot me a surprised look, but I had already made my decision. This was not the battlefield I had chosen for this fight. Very well, Judge Harrison said, clearly surprised by my calm demeanor. The divorce decree is granted with asset and debt division as agreed upon by both parties. As we gathered our documents, Jonathan approached me with the same smirk that had grown unbearable over the past few months. I have to admit, Sarah, he said with a grin, I'm surprised. I thought you'd put up more of a fight. I looked at him calmly. It's a man who had shared my life for nearly 4 decades and yet still didn't understand who I was. Sometimes the smartest strategy is knowing when not to fight, I replied. His grin widened. Well, I appreciate you being reasonable about this. Look, once everything settles down, maybe we can, Jonathan, I interrupted gently. Let me ask you something. After all these years, have you ever seen me make a truly foolish decision? I asked. His smile faltered just slightly. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. You've known me for 38 years. You've ever seen me do something truly foolish when it came to matters of importance? He was quiet for a moment, thinking, I know, ... I suppose not. Then, why would you assume I'm starting now? Before he could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the courthouse hallway with that confused look on his face. But as I pushed through the courthouse doors, I heard his laughter echo behind me aloud, cruel and triumphant. Face it, Sarah, he called out, his voice carrying across the marble lobby. You don't have a dime to your name. 38 years of marriage and you're walking away with nothing. I didn't turn around. I didn't respond. Simply walked to my car, got in, and drove home to the modest apartment I'd rented since the separation began. I said nothing because I didn't need to. Jonathan had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. The apartment I rented was a simple 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex, about 20 minutes from our old house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, and comfortable with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. On the outside, it looked like the temporary housing of a recently divorced woman starting over with limited means, exactly the impression I wanted to create. In reality, that apartment was my headquarters. The second bedroom had been converted into an office where I spent my days managing what Jonathan didn't know existed: the real Morris fortune. While he had been busy misappropriating funds from our joint accounts and business holdings, I had quietly built a separate financial empire that he would never know about. It all started 15 years ago, when my father passed away and left me a significant inheritance. Instead of combining it with our joint accounts, as Jonathan had suggested, I consulted with a financial advisor who specialized in asset protection. For high net worth individuals, Mrs. Morris, she had said, there are legal ways to maintain financial independence within a marriage. Given your husband's business dealings and appetite for risk, it may be wise to create some insulation. I had taken her advice to heart. Over the years, I'd funneled my inheritance and profits from some savvy personal investments into a web of trusts, offshore accounts, and holding companies. Every transaction was completely legal, well documented, and carefully structured to remain separate from the marital assets Jonathan knew about. By the time our divorce was final, I controlled approximately $3.2 million in assets that were entirely mine: investments in blue chip stocks, municipal bonds, real estate investment trusts, and even a small stake in a tech startup that had recently gone public. Right. But Jonathan knew none of this. To him, I was still the financially naive housewife who had never worked outside the home and didn't understand business. In the days following our divorce hearing, I kept up the act. I shopped for groceries with coupons, bought generic brands, drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and lived as if I were counting every penny. Meanwhile, I watched Jonathan's situation unfold with the focus of a predator watching wounded prey. Morris Realty was bleeding money. The Riverside Development Project, which Jonathan had been so confident about, had hit regulatory snags. 3 major investors had pulled out after learning about the company's debt situation. His business partner, the one who had been sitting smugly in the courtroom, was already exploring options for dissolving their partnership. Most importantly, the $350,000 loan he had taken out in my name was coming due, and he didn't have the cash to pay it. I gave him exactly 1 week to realize the full scope of his mistake. The call came on a Wednesday evening, exactly 1 week after our divorce was finalized. I was sitting in my small living room reading a mystery novel and sipping herbal tea when my phone rang. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen. Let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello, Sarah." His voice was strained, lacking the usual confidence and charm that had once defined him. "We need to talk, do we?" I replied, a bit surprised. "I thought our business was concluded. Sarah, please, I'm in trouble." Real trouble. I marked my place in the book and set it aside. What kind of trouble? The loan. The $350,000 loan. It's being called in, and I don't have the money. The bank is threatening foreclosure on everything. The business, the house, everything. "See?" I said, my voice calm. "And how does this concern me?" "As I recall," he continued, "you were quite clear in court that the business debts were my responsibility now. But it's your signature on the loan documents, your credit. That guaranteed it. If I default, they'll come after you next." I stayed quiet for a long moment, letting him stew in his panic. "Jonathan," I said finally, "you spent the last 6 months telling everyone who would listen that I'm financially naive and don't understand business. You convinced a judge that I'm essentially helpless without your support. Why would you think I'd have any solution to a problem that you apparently can't figure out?" He paused, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head because he finally said, "You're smarter than I gave you credit for. Am I, Sarah? I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But we were married for 38 years. That has to count for something. I'm asking no. I'm begging you, please help me figure this out." The desperation in his voice was almost pitiable. Almost, what exactly are you asking me to do? I don't know. Use some of your inheritance money, maybe? Or help me negotiate with the bank. You always were good with people, good at finding solutions when things seemed impossible. Jonathan, what inheritance money? You cleaned out all our joint accounts, remember? According to your own attorney, I walked away from our marriage with essentially nothing. But surely you have something saved up? An emergency fund, maybe? I interrupted him. Even if I did, why would I use it to bail out the man who forged my signature, stole my family jewelry, and publicly humiliated me in court? There was silence on the line for so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. If I go down for this, I'm taking you with me. That loan is in your name, Sarah, your credit, your collateral. If I can't pay it, they'll come after you for every penny. And there it was, the threat I had been waiting for. The final revelation of who Jonathan really was beneath all the charm and promises. I see, I said calmly. Let me make... Sure, I understand. You're asking me to help you, because if I don't, you'll let me be destroyed by the debt you created in my name without my knowledge or consent. Sarah? Thank you for clarifying that. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice rising in panic. It means, I said, standing up and walking to the window of my small apartment. You have 24 hours to figure out your situation. After that, I'm going to stop being quite so accommodating. Sarah. Wait, I hung up the phone and immediately called Grace Williams. Grace, it's Sarah Morris. Are you available to meet tomorrow morning? I think it's time we discussed phase 2 of our strategy. The next morning, I dressed more carefully than I had in months. Instead of my usual jeans and sweater, I chose a tailored black dress, professional heels, and the pearls my grandmother had given me, the ones Jonathan thought he'd pawned. Grace met me at the downtown offices of Williams and Associates. Her expression curious. She had been patient with my unorthodox approach to the divorce proceedings, trusting that I had a larger strategy even when she wasn't entirely sure what it was. I don't understand it. Sarah, Grace said, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. You sounded different on the phone last night. More decisive? I am, I replied, my voice steady. It's time to show my hand. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder I'd been preparing for months. Grace, remember when you said proving the forged signatures would be difficult but not impossible? Yes, she replied, her tone cautious. But the cost of forensic analysis and expert witnesses would be substantial. And even then, I interrupted. What if I told you I had video evidence of Jonathan practicing my signature? Grace's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Excuse? Me? I slid a tablet across the desk and pressed play. On the screen, Jonathan appeared, sitting at his desk in our home office, methodically copying my signature from various documents. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months before the loan documents were signed. How did you, Grace? Started? Kay? Her voice trailing off. I installed security cameras in the house after some valuable items started disappearing. I explained. At first, I thought we might have had a break-in. Instead, I discovered my husband was stealing from me and practicing financial fraud. Grace stared at the screen, watching Jonathan as he continued his forgery practice, completely unaware he was being recorded. This is ... She began, enough to prove fraud. Yes, but there's more. I opened another folder and spread out financial documents, bank statements, and transaction records from the past 15 years. I've been maintaining completely separate finances that Jonathan knew nothing about. The inheritance from my father, some smart investments, and profits from a small business I've been running online. All completely legal, all properly documented, and all mine. Grace picked up one of the statements, her eyes widening as she saw the numbers. Sarah, this shows assets of over $3 million. $3.2 million to be precise. But in court, I said nothing. I interrupted. I let Jonathan and his attorney make assumptions, and I didn't correct them. There's no legal requirement to disclose assets that were never marital property to begin with. Grace leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. You've been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers? Something like that? I gathered the documents back into their folder. Now, here's what I need you to do. I outlined my plan. It was simple yet elegant and devastating in its execution. First, we would file fraud charges against Jonathan based on the video evidence of forgery. The criminal charges would be serious enough to warrant freezing his assets pending investigation. Second, we'd use the evidence of his systematic theft of marital property, including my grandmother's jewelry, to file for recovery of stolen assets. Third, and most importantly, we would offer to purchase the defaulted loan from First National Bank at a discount, effectively making me Jonathan's creditor. I paused, letting the strategy sink in. The beauty of this approach, I continued, is that it gives us control over the timeline and terms of resolution. Instead of letting the bank foreclose and destroy everything, we can manage the process. Grace was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, she spoke. Sarah, this will ruin him completely, his business, his reputation, potentially his freedom if the fraud charges stick. Yes, I agreed calmly. It will. And you're okay with that? I thought about the question seriously. Was I okay with destroying the man I'd once loved? Was I okay with using my intelligence and resources to systematically dismantle his life the way he had tried to dismantle mine? Grace, I said, after a long pause, for 38 years, I supported Jonathan through every venture, every setback, every dream. I trusted him with my financial security, my emotional well-being, and my future. In return, he stole from me, lied to me, and tried to leave me holding the bag for his debts while he started a new life with a woman half his age. I paused, looking out the window at the city bustling below. But more than that, yesterday he threatened me. He told me that if I didn't help him, he'd let me be destroyed by the debt he created in my name. That's not the behavior of someone who made mistakes. That's the behavior of someone who sees me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. I looked back at Grace, my voice steady and clear. So yes, I'm okay with it. Sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for someone is to let them experience the full consequences of their choices. Grace nodded slowly. All right then, let's begin. The first domino fell on Friday morning when federal agents arrived at Maurice Realty with a search warrant. I wasn't there to see it, but Jonathan's secretary, who had always been friendly with me, called to give me a play-by-play. Sarah, you should have seen his face when they walked in with those boxes, she whispered into the phone. Agent Rodriguez announced they were investigating bank fraud, and Mr. Morris just went white as a sheet. How's he handling it? Not well. He's been on the phone with his lawyer for 2 hours. Oh, and that girlfriend of his. She disappeared the minute the FBI showed up, packed up her desk, and left without a word. I made appropriate sympathetic noises, but internally I was satisfied. Nothing exposed fair-weather relationships like federal criminal charges. The second domino fell Monday morning when the bank received our offer to purchase Jonathan's defaulted loan. Grace had been brilliant in her negotiation. We offered to buy the debt for 60 cents on the dollar, saving the bank the cost and hassle of foreclosure while giving us complete control over the asset recovery process. By Tuesday, I legally owned the $350,000 debt that Jonathan owed, along with all the collateral securing it, which meant I now owned his business. Jonathan called me Wednesday evening, his voice hollow with shock and disbelief. Sarah, what have you done? I've protected my interests, Jonathan, just like you taught me to. Protected your interests, you destroyed me. The FBI, the fraud charges, buying my debt. This is revenge, pure and simple. Is it? I asked mildly. Or is it just good business? You always said I didn't understand finance, so I thought I'd try to learn. This isn't you, Sarah. This cold, calculating behavior, it's not who you are. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You're right, Jonathan. This isn't who I was. But it's exactly who I needed to become to survive what you did to me. Sarah, please, we can work something out. I'll sell everything, pay you back every penny. With what? I interrupted. According to your own testimony in court, you don't have any significant assets, remember? You spent months convincing everyone that you were barely solvent. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked, what do you want? I want what you owe me. It's the $350,000 you borrowed in my name, plus interest, plus penalties for late payment. I also want the return of my grandmother's jewelry and compensation for the other personal property you stole from our marriage. Sarah, you know I don't have that kind of money. Then I guess you'll need to be creative. You have 30 days to present me with a payment plan. Or I'll begin foreclosure proceedings on all collateral securing the debt, which includes the business. Yes, I said, and the house. Yes, Jonathan, you'll destroy everything. We built together. You already did that, I replied coldly. I'm just cleaning up the mess. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, not the cheap stuff I've been buying for appearances, but a nice Pinot Grigio from my private reserve. I sat down to review the business records Grace had obtained through discovery. Morris Realty was actually worth more than Jonathan had let everyone believe. Buried under the debt and creative accounting were some genuinely valuable assets, prime development rights, long-term contracts, and a reputation in the industry that could be salvaged with proper management. With some restructuring and competent leadership, it could actually be quite profitable. I made a note to schedule a meeting with Jonathan's business partner. It was time to discuss the future of Maurice Realty and whether there was any room in that future for Jonathan himself. The meeting with David Chen, Jonathan's business partner, took place the following week at a neutral location, the conference room at Grace's law firm. David arrived looking nervous and defeated, clutching a briefcase that probably contained every ... David stood when I entered the room, holding a financial document related to his partnership with Jonathan. Double quotes Mrs. Morris, he said, his tone cautious. I want you to know that I had no idea about the forged signatures or the extent of what Jonathan was doing. I raised a hand to stop him. David, I'm not here to assign blame or discuss the past. I'm here to talk about the future. We spend the next 2 hours carefully going through the business books. As I suspected, Maurice Realty still had potential. It was managed properly and freed from Jonathan's gambling debts and poor decisions. I'm willing to restructure the debt and maintain the business as a going concern. I said, but there will be conditions. David nodded eagerly. Whatever you need. First, Jonathan is out completely. He'll surrender all ownership interests and have no operational role going forward. David's face remained neutral as he processed the news. Understood? Second, you'll need to bring in a qualified CFO to oversee all financial operations. Someone with forensic accounting experience to ensure this kind of situation never happens again. Absolutely, David agreed. Third, I continued. I want complete transparency, monthly financial reports, quarterly audits, an approval authority over any transactions above $50,000. David was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications. Mrs. Morris, what you're describing sounds more like a takeover than a restructuring. That's exactly what it is, I said calmly. I'm taking over the business that Jonathan used my credit to finance. The only question is whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the liquidation. He signed the partnership agreement that same afternoon. 3 days later, Jonathan showed up at my apartment unannounced. I watched through the peephole as he stood in the hallway, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his face unshaven. He had the desperate look of a man who had finally realized he was trapped. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Hello, Jonathan. Sarah, we need to talk. I thought we'd covered everything in our previous conversations. Please. Just 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him enter. He walked into my small living room and looked around with barely concealed surprise. "This place is nice," he said, as if he'd expected to find me living in squalor. "It serves my needs." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes, genuine fear. "Sarah, the FBI is building a case. My lawyer says they have video evidence of me forging your signature." "Do they?" "You know they do. You're the one who gave it to them." I didn't deny it. There was no point. I could go to prison, Sarah. Real prison, 5 to 10 years for bank fraud? Yes, you could. Is that what you want to see? Me in prison? I considered the question seriously. Did I want to see Jonathan behind bars? The man I had once loved, despite everything he had done. "What I want," I said finally, "is for you to take responsibility for what you've done. Not just to me, but to David, to your employees, to everyone whose lives you've damaged with your selfishness and lies. I am taking responsibility. I'm here, aren't I? I'm trying to make things right. Are you?" "Ah," I asked, my voice cold. "Or are you here because you finally realized that I'm not the helpless victim you thought I was?" His shoulders sagged. "When did you become so hard, Sarah?" "I became hard," I replied, "when I discovered that the man I'd loved and trusted for 38 years had been stealing from me and forging my signature. I became hard when I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below. "But you know what, Jonathan?" I said, turning back to him. "I'm grateful. Your betrayal forced me to become someone stronger, smarter, and more independent than I ever was when I was depending on you. In a way, you did me a favor." When I turned back, he was staring at me with something like recognition. "You planned all of this, didn't you? The divorce settlement, the loan purchase, everything. Knew exactly what you were doing from the beginning." "I knew what I needed to do to protect myself," I said. "Everything else was just responding to the choices you made." I was quiet for a long moment. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "That depends on you," I replied. "He can fight this, hire more lawyers, drag out the criminal proceedings, force me to liquidate everything just to recover what you owe me. Or you can accept reality and work with me to minimize the damage. What kind of deal are you offering?" "Full restitution of everything you stole from me, including the jewelry. A complete confession and public apology, not private. And you disappear from my life permanently. In return, I'll work with a prosecutor to recommend leniency on the criminal charges you'll still face. You'll still face consequences, but hopefully not 5 to 10 years in federal prison." Jonathan sank into my small armchair, his head in his hands. "How did it come to this, Sarah? How did we get here?" "You got here by making choices, Jonathan. Every day for years you chose to lie instead of tell the truth. You chose to steal instead of ask for help. You chose to risk everything we'd built together rather than face your problems honestly." I sat down across from him, this man who had once been the center of my world. "I got here," I said softly, "by finally choosing to value myself enough to fight back.